Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to this week's edition of Imperial as One's Belonging series, where we explore the lived experiences of individuals from the Black, Asian, and minority ethnic backgrounds. And each week I say this, and I'm going to say it again because I'm really excited about this week's guest. And our guest this week is Samantha Tross. And Samantha Tross is the I'm going to let her tell her story, but she is a consultant orthopedic surgeon, and it's such a privilege to have her spend her time with us this afternoon. So, Samantha, I'm going to start off with my usual question, which is, can you tell me a little bit about your early childhood and how you gained your sense of identity and sense of belonging as you were growing up?
Thank you so much for that introduction, Wayne, and I'm delighted to be here. So I was born in Guyana in South America.
Mhm.
And for those who do not know, Guyana is a country made up of 6 peoples, but predominantly those of Black and Asian minority background. The
Right.
rest being European, Chinese, Portuguese, and native Amerindians. And so growing up in Guyana, I was in an environment where I can see people of color in positions of authority.
Mhm.
And really learned early that color should really not be a barrier to me succeeding. And I think that's really what stood me in good stead. At age 11, I came to the UK because my father got a job at the Commonwealth Secretariat and he was sent to Africa. And because his job involved moving from country to country, a friend of his said, look, if you get the opportunity to send your children to England for schooling, you should seize it. And he did. And so I ended up coming to the UK and being in boarding school, where I stayed until age 16. And felt that I'd had enough of that, really. And I then went to do my A levels in Birmingham,
Mhm.
and from Birmingham was lucky enough to get a place at University College Middlesex, where I went to study medicine. In 1987, when I went to medical school, it was the first year of the joint school. It was then when medical schools were starting to amalgamate. I mean, that's become very common now. And so I was the first year of the joint school between University College London and the Middlesex School of Medicine.
Right.
So, I mean, that's it in a nutshell, really.
Right, I'm going to backtrack a little bit because there's a couple of things which you've said which already kind of like intriguing to me. So the first thing was the fact that you were raised in Guyana and you saw Black people in positions of authority, positions of power, and so for you that was normal events.
Very much so, very much so. I mean, Guyana has 2 main political parties, which sadly remain to this day divided racially, predominantly. And at that time, it was the party with predominantly Black people that was in power.
Mhm.
And they filled most of the senior jobs and so on. And so, I saw that. And of course, my parents were tremendous role models as well. And they really instilled in me the belief that I could be anything I needed to be. I
Brilliant.
wanted to be, I should say. Yeah.
Yeah. So the transition for you from going from Guyana to the UK to England, how did that affect you? Because you were about 11, you said. So
Yeah,
that's
I mean, it was very traumatic because I had just passed for one of the best schools in Guyana, in common entrance. So the top boys' school at the time was Queen's College, but it just started taking female students. The
right.
top girls' school was Bishop's. I applied to Queen's College and I got in.
Yeah.
And I had some close friends as well who'd applied, and I was very much looking forward to going to high school, to this QC, which everyone had talked about. And so very, very sad to have to come to England. But what sort of helped that was I used to read a lot of Edith Blyton books at the time. And the way that she described boarding school, I was slightly, quite excited. Of course, it was nothing like it was described in the books. Yeah. So, but the shock, because not only was I in a different culture, but I was away from my parents. That's separation.
Yeah.
And then at school, the boarding houses was such that it was divided according to age. So although I went with 2 siblings, we were in different boarding houses.
Yeah.
And it just so happened that my boarding house was at the opposite end of the compound to my brother and sister. So
Yeah.
I really felt a sense of isolation.
So how did you cope with it at that state? Because you were 11 and kind of
Yeah.
like separating from parents, separated from your siblings, kind of, and yet in a whole different environment. What do you think? What did you have to do to not to survive, but to cope with this new situation that you found yourself in?
I had to dig deep. I mean, I remember the first day of school being sort of pointed, the form mistress, the house mistress sort of pointed me in the direction of school and told me where to go. And no one actually took me there. And I remember getting into the main compound and being enveloped by a swirl of children, the first day of term, and people are coming back and they're excited and they're meeting their friends and all this activity taking place around me. And I felt tremendously lost.
Mm.
And I actually crumpled into a heap. I started crying and I was down crying for a little while. And I suddenly saw this voice go off in my head saying, well, this is not really helping you. You have to get on and get up and get on with it.
Mhm.
And I think that's been my motto for life. I don't remember ever crying again at boarding school, actually.
Mhm.
I just thought that the resolve in me to just, well, you just got to get up and get on. You're here, you got no one, you just got to get on with it. And so that's my life,
Yeah.
really.
So boarding school, we won't go into the details of board because for some they like, some they don't.
Yeah.
But then you said that you left boarding school at 16 and then did your, what was the factors that surrounded you leaving
Yeah,
boarding?
I was very unhappy at school. I never quite, I didn't fit in. And there was a part of me that I suppose didn't want to fit in. I just felt I don't want to be here. I want
Mhm.
to be back in the Caribbean. I
Mhm.
don't have anything in common with these people.
Mhm.
There was a lot of teasing taking place
Mhm.
at a very thick Caribbean accent. Um, Myself, my siblings, and then there was another family of two brothers, and that was it in the school, for nearly 300 people. So there were no other real Black people, and there was a lot of teasing taking place and so on. And I just wasn't happy. I had this yearning to be back in the Caribbean. And I just said to my parents that I wanted to leave. So after my O levels, I didn't want to stay on and do A levels there.
Yeah.
So my parents, who were in Zambia at the time, I think they're in Zambia. They might have been in Tanzania. They may have moved from Zambia to Tanzania. But anyway, my mom then decided to come to England.
Right.
And so my parents then bought a house, which they bought in Birmingham. And so I went to do my A levels in Birmingham at college.
How did you find that transition from private school to the state school? And how did that help? Did it help you in gaining that sense of belonging, that sense of identity? Or did that not really come up?
Um, well, I was delighted to be away from the confines of school. It was very strict. You couldn't do very much, and perhaps did a bit too much socializing when I got to college, and so when I went on, I perhaps didn't focus as much on the schoolwork. A little bit of freedom there, and so I didn't get my A level grades that I needed to get into medical school. So I then had to knuckle down and spend another year. I went back and retook them because I was absolutely certain that that's what I wanted to do, was to go to medical school. And so I went back and retook the chemistry, which was the one that had let me down, to get into medical school. So there was a bit of, but did I feel a bit more grounded there? I'm not sure I did. I very much felt I resisted integrating into the English system.
Right.
There was a sense of resistance there. I felt like I didn't have much in common.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my sense of identity really took shape when I got to London and I met a group of Guyanese, and in fact a wider West Indian community that I was actually introduced to in Birmingham. In college it was still quite limited
Right.
at that time.
Because I was going to ask you about that in terms of the fact that in Birmingham it had quite a or it does have quite a multicultural um, community, and kind of like the community at large. Whereas in your private school, there may have only been very few Black students. I'd have thought that when you got into Birmingham, that kind of like metropolitan mix would have been much more evident. and it may have allowed you to kind of like feel more at home?
Yeah, I don't know why it is. I mean, within my actual class in college, there weren't many
Right.
Black students. And whilst I did, I say party a bit, I did do that with friends that I grew up with. Like, they were friends of my parents from Zambia.
Right.
And so they were close family friends. So I stuck really within that context, you know. I
Hmm.
didn't really extend beyond that.
Hmm. So
Yes.
you move down to London, you find a new community, you're
Mm.
you're actually at medical school. How did that process of transitioning to London now? Because now you're away, but you're older and
Mm-hmm.
you're studying a subject. There's one question which I should quickly ask you. Why medicine? Why
Why
did you want to
medicine?
do medicine?
I don't know, you know, but apparently at age 7, I made a declaration to the family that I'm going to be a surgeon when I grew up. And I've, you know, I've tried for many years to try and remember where that came from. Now, I know I was a very avid reader. Did I read about medicine and surgery? I don't, because I didn't say a doctor, I said surgeon. I was very specific, apparently.
Yeah.
My mom was a nurse. And no doubt, you know, I used to visit her in hospital, and I vaguely recall her saying that, you know, you shouldn't do nursing, you should be a doctor. I vaguely recall that, but that certainly wasn't. I wasn't pressured into the decision.
Right.
Um, and then I had elderly relatives. So my maternal grandmother and my father's aunt
Yeah.
died at my home. So I was exposed to death at a young age, and also a young friend of mine died from tetanus. And I remember going to her funeral at age 7. So I guess it's a combination of all these factors, but I'm not entirely sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're at medical school. You're enjoying life at medical school. Um, how was that transition for you again? What kind of community spirit did you have, or what was your motivation whilst you were at medical school?
Well, it was, now here's interesting, because that experience at boarding school now helped me at medical school. In medical school, there were over 200 students,
Hmm.
of which I was the only Black female in the class.
Right.
There was one other Black male that came through the UK system, and we had 5 exchange students from Malawi.
Right.
And in the year above me was one Black girl. That's it. And the
What?
year above her was one Black guy. So that was it, you know. So that feeling of being different may have been traumatic had I not experienced it at medical school, at boarding
The
school.
boarding school.
So in a sense, although I'd gone through that difficulty, it paid dividends by the time I got to medical school. So I was used to being the odd one out and so on, and just getting on with it. So very, very used to it by then. At the same time, I was in, I specifically applied to International Hall, which is one of the student houses where there were students from all around the world. I didn't go to one of the designated medical houses where
Right.
most of my classmates were. So I found myself, yes, with a community, a West Indian community, a supportive West Indian community, but I was very much distanced from my medical school friends. So I
Right.
don't think I ever quite got the balance right there, you know, because I then just really focused on being within my West Indian community. And I think to students, it's important to get the balance, because there were lots of things I missed out on. There were opportunities that popped up in medical school that I wasn't aware of because I wasn't socializing there.
Right.
Yeah, so yeah, it's interesting. But, I had a good time though. I enjoyed medical school.
So where along the path then, did you then think to yourself, actually, what I would like to do is go in to become a surgeon? You'd always said that you wanted to be a surgeon, but that's like saying I just want to be a doctor. There's
Yeah,
so many
exactly.
different branches. So
Exactly,
so
exactly.
so what was it that captured your attention, and why do you think that was?
I guess I played to my strengths. You know, whilst I was at medical school and rotating through the different specialties, I became enthused about many. You know, I really enjoyed psychiatry, for instance.
Mhm.
I enjoyed cardiology. But you know, what I liked about surgery is, well, no, I was very good at anatomy. I excelled at anatomy. So it
Right.
was something that came naturally. I found that I didn't particularly like the medical specialties because there's a lot of chronicity. And I didn't feel the sense, of course, you do have an impact on patients, but it wasn't as quick as I would have liked. And surgery gave that. You
Mhm.
do an intervention and you can see the benefits of your intervention very quickly. So then I quickly decided, okay, surgery is for me. But then within surgery, I rotated through different specialties. So I spent some time in vascular surgery, neurosurgery, plastic surgery. I hope that the people listening know what these specialties are all about. But vascular obviously to do with the blood vessels, neurosurgery with the brain, spinal cord, and so on, the nerves associated with that. General surgery is usually within the abdominal content, so the bowels and so on. Breast also comes in under general surgery. Orthopaedics, which is the bones, ligaments, tendons, muscles, structures associated with the bones. So those are ones. So plastics, neurovascular, orthopedics, and general surgery. And I decided that I'd go for orthopedics because the orthopedic surgeons I felt the most affable, I would say. And they when I was amongst them, I felt like a valued member of the team.
Right.
In other specialties, as a medical student, I often felt like I was getting in the way. So they welcomed me into the fold. That was one. The fact that in orthopedics, the patients are not very sick. They have a sick body part, but they in themselves are quite well. Whereas in neurosurgery and general surgery, the patient can be very, very sick. So I like that about orthopedics. The fact that the surgery, unless you're working in a trauma center, could be done in daylight hours. You know, you can splint the limb in a plaster or a frame or something and do the surgery the next day. And I felt that it would be the one that would least impact on a personal life.
Yeah.
And within orthopedics, you've got something for everyone. You got male and female patients, young and old. Whereas obstetrics and gynecology, which I did think of briefly, it's just predominantly women of childbearing age. So you have the great selection of patients, but also, as I said, the specialty itself. You can be a foot and ankle surgeon, a hip surgeon, a knee surgeon. I'm a hip and knee surgeon, by the way.
Yeah.
You can do spines, you can do pediatric orthopedics. There's really something for everyone, from the very delicate end of surgery to the more physical end. And I chose the more physical end for my sins.
So you've one of the things which I think you said, which I felt resonated, was that you felt that the community within the orthopedic surgeons was more welcoming compared to other disciplines which you had experience of. Now, when you say that, was it more welcoming as a woman, as a person of color? What was it? Or was it just that they seemed not to look at those kinds of barriers?
Well, you know, it's very interesting because orthopedic surgery of all the specialties is the least diverse in terms of gender, ethnicity, etc. So I may have just been lucky that with the actual surgeons I had interaction with, that they were welcoming, because that's not the overall impression of orthopedics outside, you know, within the surgical community.
Yeah.
So I was very lucky there, and the surgeons that I work with took me under his wing and actually became a mentor to me. So yes, it's very, very male dominated. So there's a lot of sexism there. And when I deviated from that initial hospital, of course, I experienced all these things throughout my training program. But I was just very fortunate that at the time when I was very young and impressionable and trying to decide where to go, that I found a team that were welcoming.
Yeah. So they had a big part to play in helping you to make your decision as to where you would ultimately end up.
Yes.
But had you gone to another hospital,
it may have been a totally different story.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So and you mentioned about the fact that the surgeon who kind of like took you under his wing, what was it about him that was welcoming and kind of like, you said that he became a mentor? In what way, if you wouldn't mind?
Yeah, well, I was very lucky that the hospital was based on multiple sites, and there was a major hospital, and then there was like a little sister hospital, a very smaller cottage hospital that, you know, they had to do some clinics and some day surgery there. And so when the consultant would go down there, because there's a tier, the consultant is the most senior, and then there would be a registrar. But when I first qualified, there were multiple layers of registrar. There'd be a senior registrar, a junior registrar, Then there would be a senior house officer and then a house officer who's the first qualified doctor. I mean, that structure is all disappeared now. Now you've got a consultant, the registrar, if you're lucky, and a foundation doctor, a junior doctor.
Mhm.
So the registrar, the senior registrar would be at the major hospital, and the consultant would go off to do this minor clinic, and he would involve me, and make me feel like a surgeon. He'd say, okay, right, I'm going to show you how to do this procedure. There may be several similar procedures on the day, and he'd do a couple, and he'd say, look, I'll help you, and actually let me do some of the surgery. I felt like a surgeon. Obviously very much supervised by him, and so on. But and you say, well, what would you want me to do next? And I said, well, could you kindly pass that and hold this, and I felt quite important. And I thought, this is great, I can do this,
So he empowered you.
He empowered me. He empowered me, yes.
Yeah.
And now also being involved in the clinics and seeing patients come back extremely happy following their procedure at a very short time course after the intervention. I thought this is something I'd like to do.
Yeah. So there's the rapidity, if that's the right word, but the short duration of recovery.
Yes.
So it's not that they're unwell as such. It's just, as you said, that it's a body part which needs fixing. It's like,
that's right. I mean, if you're in a major trauma center, that's different. Those patients can be very sick because they've got multiple injuries. But in most cases, it's patients well, but they've got a painful hip or a knee or whatever, or a fractured forearm or whatever it is. But the rest of them is okay.
So you got involved with that. You decided that you wanted to become a surgeon. You're on your different rotations, or on your different surgical rotations. Not everybody was welcoming.
No.
Right? How did you cope with that? In a pragmatic way? Did you collapse? I'm not envisaging that you collapsed and started crying, but I could be wrong. Right? But how did you cope with that, going through your experience?
Well, I was very resolute in my focus as to, I wanted to become a consultant, surgeon, and so I need to stick through the program to get there. Okay, so I couldn't allow myself to be deviated. Now, in specific circumstances, you have to choose your battles. You can't fight every battle, or else I think you would get battle weary. Okay, so when there were important issues, I would speak up for myself. But speaking up for yourself, you've got to be aware that there may be consequences for that. So that's why I caution anyone when they're going to challenge. But for me, I'm the kind of person I have to do that. Or else it would just eat away at me, and I had to do what is best for me. So I would speak up. And if you can't speak up, I think you have to find someone who perhaps can speak on your behalf. But I certainly confronted issues that I needed to. Sometimes, that involved firstly speaking to people that I trusted, to seek their opinion before actually,
before taking the next step.
Yes, yeah.
So that's really interesting, because I was going to ask the question about who your confidants were, or who it was who you could go to and speak to about any issues related to your career progression. Because it sounds, when was it that you decided that you wanted to become a consultant? At what stage? How quickly was it that you had made up your mind?
Once I got into the specialty, I mean, there was no other thing. I got to get to the top. I mean, nothing else was going to be good enough.
Right. So once you, as soon as you got in, you were saying, I'm going to be a consultant.
That was the aim.
Yeah.
And at that time, you were either going to be a hospital consultant or a GP.
Right.
And at the time when I was coming through, it was more prestigious to be a hospital consultant.
Right.
And the pendulum swung, and then people wanted to become GPs, because they had a better quality of life and so on. I think it might be swinging back the other way now to the hospital. But that was what I think most people of my, my generation and so on, who were getting into it. The aim was to become a consultant. That's what you went into it doing.
So just in terms of course, you mentioned about your initial mentor who helped you to get to, who gave you that experience of being a surgeon. I am a surgeon. But other than that, what other role models or I'm still trying to find mentors who helped you along your pathway to get to where you are now?
Yeah.
Because
No, I had a lot of mentors,
okay.
there were people who were, yeah, when I think back, I was very fortunate, and nobody who looked like me. They
Mm-hmm.
were white men,
Mm-hmm.
essentially. So the first one was David Lightoller, who I mentioned, who's an orthopedic surgeon.
Mm-hmm.
Then I met a gentleman called Richard Earlham, who was a general surgeon. And he just took to me. We had a trauma call, and I was the scribe. So I had to write down and document what was taking place during, and he was very impressed with my note taking.
Yeah.
And so he was like, oh, geez, this is very good. I need to find out more about you. And he just became very invested in me.
Mm-hmm.
And even though it's a different specialty, throughout my career, he was always there.
Mm-hmm.
And then after him, whilst I was going through the training program, I met another consultant called Roger Patterson, who was another white orthopedic surgeon, and he was higher up in my training. And these guys were they did a lot to empower me. And I felt, and there were other consultants as well that I work with during my training that I could ask advice. I mean, sometimes I didn't always get the advice I wanted, but I had more of a group as well. I had, as I said, friends within the West Indian community and so on. So
Mm-hmm.
I think I was fortunate in that regard.
So, as you said, most of all of the role models which you had appeared to be white men. Was that part of a motivation for you to say, I can be the first Black woman? Was that ever on the agenda? Or was it, I just want to be a consultant?
Yeah, it was just I want to be a consultant. I was not aware that there were no other Black women.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad that I didn't know that, because I think that would have been tremendous pressure. So
Right,
I went through my career just going for what I wanted.
right,
Yeah.
right.
So
And so
that,
just being the best that you could be at the stage that you are,
that's
and
right.
then wherever it leads, you would go.
That's right.
Is
But
that
it had to lead to the top.
right? So tell me about the day when you knew that you were going to become a consultant. How this is kind of like off the track from my normal question,
Mm.
but
Well, I finished my training, and then the next step after you finish is to start obviously applying for consultant jobs.
mhm,
And most often you would apply for a job in the region where you train, because that's where you're best known.
yeah,
And a job came up very soon. Well, it was interesting. Before that, I finished the training program, and I didn't see any jobs coming up. So I was offered a job as a locum consultant. So where you have, there's a consultant job, but the person may have gone off on maternity leave or sick leave, but not particularly maternity, because there weren't many women in orthopedics, but you know what I mean? They're
yeah,
away for a time, and they tried to just fill that slot. And one came up at a hospital where I had trained, and that's why they approached me. So I had that experience, and it's interesting because it can be a double-edged sword going to somewhere where you're known, because either you get a lot of support, or they try to take advantage because they knew you as a trainee. So, and they try to take advantage of me.
mhm,
I decided, but this is not the environment. Because at that point, I'd always wanted to work in a teaching hospital,
right,
because that was the thing. It wasn't just about becoming a hospital consultant. The real thing was to become a hospital consultant in a teaching hospital. That had a bit more prestige. But then there I was in this teaching hospital environment, and I didn't like it. It attracts generally people who are a sort of A-type personality, which I am as well, but it's a bit more cutthroat, I would say. That's how it seemed to me. I'm not saying that's how it is now, because I am actually now in a teaching hospital as it happens, but I subsequently went into a hospital that wasn't one of the sort of top teaching hospitals, but we've come merged with another hospital, and I'm now there. But at the time, I thought, I'm not sure this is the environment I want to be in.
mhm,
Having worked towards it. So anyway, another job came up in the region, which I went for, and I was unsuccessful in the interview. But what was good about that was, before I went for the interview, I was told only two were shortlisted, that the job was going to go to the other person. I was told that. Yeah. And so I had to make a decision whether to go for the interview or not, but I decided I'm going to go because I had nothing to lose.
Yeah.
If I go to this interview and I don't get it, well, I never was going to get it anyway.
Yeah.
But I'm going to get some interview experience.
Yeah.
And that was the key. And so I went for it. And the feedback was really good. They were very happy with me. And they said that, we really wish we had another job to give to you. So that boosted my confidence.
Yeah.
And so the next job I went for, I got.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
How was, I know that it might seem like a run of the mill, well, it's part of the next progression, but it's still that achievement of saying, actually, people want me for this position. They've seen what I can do, they've heard what I can do, and they want. How did that make you feel personally, considering all of that you'd gone through to get to that point? How did that make
I mean, I was ecstatic. It wasn't as straightforward as it sounds, so I went for this next interview, and there are a few of us interviewed, but it was so the person in front of me, I was waiting outside of the interview, and it was a very pally affair. I could hear lots of laughter, and it seemed very, very relaxed. I went in for my interview subsequently, and it was a totally different environment. I wouldn't say hostile, but it certainly wasn't as friendly and relaxed as I heard the other person had experienced. And so you're aware of that as you're sitting there. You think, well, this is not going as well as this other person's interview, but you try, you do very much, and you do your very best.
Yeah.
And at the end of the interview, they offered the job to the other guy. Surprise, surprise, But there was a consultant who was actually the head of department at that time, and he very much wanted me.
Yeah.
And he fought for me, and they actually managed to put another job together, and so I got appointed as well. But I wasn't the first one that the job was offered to. So both of us got appointed that day.
Well, I would then say that you were the more impressive of the two candidates, because they had a job already, but they created one for you, right?
Yes. That's one way of looking at it. And interestingly, the other person only lasted a couple of years in the job. Couldn't take the pressure. I'm still there. 17 years later.
Wow. That's absolutely wonderful. So in your day-to-day job, you must have seen a lot of changes in the NHS over the time period that you've been working. How would you say that it's helped in developing individual sense of identity and sense of belonging? I know this is a bit of an offbeat question, but
I think there's still an awful long way to go. In the wake of the whole George Floyd movement, that really brought things to the fore, and there've been a lot more. It really depends on who's at the helm, because we can talk about having these values. We have all these values. We have what we call heart values in the trust: honesty, equality, and all that sort of thing, accountability, etc., respect and trust. But unless it's actually lived out by the people at the top on a daily basis, it doesn't really become part of the culture and the fabric of the organization. I can't speak for the whole of the NHS. I can speak about my hospital. And we were very lucky around the time of the George Floyd movement to have a chief executive who really got it.
Right.
But unfortunately, he was an interim.
Right.
Since someone else has taken over, I'm on a sabbatical now, so I can't really talk about how this current CEO is performing. But I know that we had an awful lot of work to do, and you have to look where you know how an organization is functioning when you're not looking at just the senior people. I mean, I didn't feel any racism per se working in the organization. I feel that I deal more with sexism. So in my current role, there are about 27 consultants, I believe, but I'm the only female.
Wow.
So mine is dealing with that gender. Of course, I'm sure race comes into it, but it's primarily that. Now, when I interact with the Black nurses and I hear their experience, then that gives you a sense of what's happening within the organization.
Yeah.
And so there's still a long way to go, I think, with that with empowering people to that sense of identity. But the work has begun. And it certainly began in earnest around that time.
Yeah.
So I am hopeful, and I know right now they're doing a lot of work. They brought some people in to do some other work to follow up and try and change systems, you know. So I'm hopeful.
Okay. I'm going to just see if there's any questions from the audience before I ask one or two more questions. Is
Sure.
there any questions which anyone would like to ask Samantha at this point? Otherwise, I've got another couple questions. I probably put everyone on the spot, so I'm going to ask. I'm going to ask my next question,
Sure.
because what you've said about there still needing to be change. What would you like, if, thinking about the experience which you've had, what advice would you have given to what advice would you give to your younger self, or to somebody who's now starting out towards this profession that you're in? What would be the key thing that you would want them to understand about the journey that they're going to be embarking on?
Well, you know, the advice I'd give to my young is not to worry so much. I am a bit of a worrier, although I project this air of, you know, confidence. But of course, you know, everyone has their worry and their anxiety. And I've spent a great deal of my life dealing with imposter syndrome, and that's because you're in an environment where I guess I'm very much in the minority, obviously because of my color as well as my gender. And you're not, if you're relying on those around you to tell you how well you're doing, you could be waiting a very long time. So you've got to believe in yourself, and you've got to find ways to bolster your confidence, however that is, so that you can really know your worth. You know, you really have to know your worth, I think, and believe that you deserve to be there, and you have a vital role to play.
It's interesting that you mentioned about having that imposter syndrome, right? Wondering, am I supposed to be here? Right? And it kind of like goes back to something which you said earlier, which was it would have been a lot of pressure had you realized that you were on track to become the first Black female orthopedic surgeon. How have you worn that title? How, you know, because
well,
that's
I mean, look, I haven't let it go to my head. I think that, but that's just my personality. I've worn it with a great degree of humility, I think. But I always try to put my best foot forward, because, you know, there is an awareness that you set the tone for others coming after you, how you conduct yourself. So I try to be very professional. I'm very much interested in others anyway, so I'm very supportive of other colleagues, and therefore in turn they then want to support me. So I think that's how I've done it. I work hard, and I try to set a good example.
Yeah, I don't doubt that you work hard at all, because you couldn't have got to where you are now without having worked hard, and to overcome sexism, racism. You have to overcome those things to have order to get to where you are, and to.
Yeah, thank you, Wade. And I do believe that that's the reason why I had so many mentors. Is because I was working hard, and then they saw that in me and then wanted to help me.
Yeah.
And so I say that for the listeners, you can't just sit back and expect people to just come and help you. You've got to show what you're made of.
Yeah.
And when they see that firing in you, they will then try to help sustain it. But you've got to, first of all, put in the work.
Yeah. Yeah. So it is about hard work. It is about having people recognize that. And I think sometimes, I will be honest, I think sometimes what we find is that people aren't recognizing, or you're being bypassed. And that's where you can then feel dejected and think, well, I am working harder than many of my colleagues, but they're the ones getting promoted.
Yes, and that is difficult. And you know, I have faced that. I have faced that at times. Or, you know, you do a bit of work and then your colleague comes in and tries to steal it as their own. I mean, all of these things I have gone through. I don't let these things stick with me though. You know, yes, you face your disappointments, you get up, you dust yourself up and you get on, because if you allow and you carry the weight of all these disappointments, then that ultimately affects how you deal with future situations. And then you can adversely affect those. So if something happens to me, I absorb it. Yes, it's happened, and I dust it off, and I try to start fresh every time. And I know that's not easy, and I don't always get it right, but I do feel that that's important. And yeah, so I lost track of what the question was there. I went off into my own little tangent.
No, it was fine. It was about that idea about what you do when you.
Oh yes, no. So what you were saying about being overlooked,
Yeah.
and that can be immensely frustrating. And I think that's one thing that we perhaps don't do well. And certainly I know as a woman, because I speak to other women of all ethnicities, and that is to promote ourselves, which the men are often much better at. And I know that I don't. And yet at the same time, I feel frustrated when people don't recognize my worth. So it's a thing, isn't it? Because if you're not willing to promote yourself, you can't get upset if people are not recognizing you. But it doesn't. I don't feel comfortable promoting myself. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's a difficult one, but I think we don't do that enough.
That's kind of like almost a whole nother topic of discussion about self-promotion against recognition. And because there's many people who are very good at promoting themselves, even though their end product isn't very good.
Exactly. Right? And so someone once said to me, think of it not as promoting yourself, but what is it that you want others to know about you?
Right. Yeah.
So it's just like, I want someone to, you're not boasting, what would I like others to know about me? It's still a work in progress.
Yeah.
But I find that I was involved in a committee recently, and I was the most senior person there.
Yeah.
But I'm not all about, I've done this, I've done that, which some of the others were doing. And then at the same time, I don't think I was being given the respect that was due, and I was getting irritated. And I thought to myself, but then you don't want to promote yourself. So it's difficult. So work in progress.
Well, excuse me. Fantastic. Your story is really fantastic. And I just want to say a big thank you for all of the hard work which you've done to get to the position where you are and be such a shining light. Even though you say you don't promote yourself, we know about you. And that's a very important thing in terms of representation, and in terms of young Black girls, young Black boys seeing and saying, we see Samantha there, she's doing a great work, and we want to just say a really big congratulations and keep up the good work. And if we can help in any way, then that's what we're here to do, to promote you, to just make sure that you're supported as you continue on this work in progress.
Thank you so much, Wayne. Thank you. It's a real pleasure. And again, thank you for having me on the program. And I just want to say, for those listeners out there, anyone who is considering a career in surgery, that we've recently formed the British Association of Black Surgeons. We're having our inaugural meeting on the 15th of November. And, come along if you can, but if you can't, do think about joining the organization. You have an opportunity to network with consultants and trainees at different levels to find out about the different specialties, to get mentoring if needed, and just someone to help signpost you through your career.
That's absolutely brilliant. We will, Imperial as one will definitely be promoting that activity, the conference, the inaugural conference.
Yes.
To have. So, and perfect. That's 15th of
November. And we've got a lineup of fantastic speakers. So yes, please come.
Definitely. I will make sure that we've got that on so that everyone at Imperial knows that that's happening. Where exactly is it, or is it online?
It's going to be held at the Royal College of Surgeons of England. It's our first one, so it's a lot to try and do an online thing as well. So it's just going to be, in person.
Yep.
But yes, come and get your tickets quickly before they're all gone.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
And we've got the opportunity. I think I can't remember how many, but there are, I think the first 10 or 12 medical students that come are free. So you're going to be one of those early bird ones,
right?
As well. Yes.
I've got some medical students who I know, and so I'm going to promote it
Please tell them to
definitely to
come.
them to tell them to go, because
Yeah.
they're quite young, but I think it would be a real inspiration for
Yeah,
them.
yeah, be
All
good for
right.
them to come. Thank you so much, Wayne. Thank you
All right.
again for having me.
Okay, I'm going to just highlight to everyone what's happening next week,
Okay.
and then we will close. So next week, we're going to have Professor Zio Yun Zix, and she is the professor and director of the graduate school at Imperial College. So she will be here, sorry, the date's wrong, but it is next week. And if you've missed any one of the previous talks, then please go ahead and have a look at our YouTube channel, which is tinyurl.com/belonging-IAO. There are some other places where you can find out some really good stories which we've had as part of our 100 guest series. And I just want to wish you all a really happy weekend. I know that the country is in mourning, but just remember we all belong, and that's what we need to work. We have to, each of us, work together to make this world a better place. And I want to just again say a big thank you to Samantha for just showing us how we can make this place much better than it was before. So Samantha, thank you very much, and everyone have a great weekend.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.